Hello, everybody. My name is Frank Rodriguez. Welcome to the Forge Your Trail podcast. Today, our guest is Mike Aguilar, and Mike is the director of esports and co-curriculum at the University of Oklahoma. He's also an instructor at the Gaylord College of Journalism at the University of Oklahoma. Mike, when I think of you have a nickname, Moog.
Yeah.
And when I think of Moog, I think of the
synthesizer.
Yeah. So explain where you got that.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me today. I'm excited for this conversation. Moog comes from an entire lifelong of subliminal messaging and rewiring of my brain, basically. I was adopted at 10 months of age, and one of my first nicknames from my dad was Mikey Moo Moo. So we move through time, and we get into my teenage years. There's this iconic game that comes out by the name of Final Fantasy VII. Inside of the Final Fantasy sphere, there is a small little weird character that looks like a cat bat thing. Couldn't explain it. That's called a Moogle. Now, those things I wouldn't attribute to now identifying myself yet as that call sign. And we fast forward to now 22 years of age. I'm starting to now date my now wife. And her best friend brings back the Mikey Moo Moo team, as it makes me blush as you start to meet new people. Well, it really kind of kicked off in the mid-2000s when another massive game called World of Warcraft came out. And in those games, you sit there and design your own avatar. And in those avatars, you also have to name them. And so you sit there and scratch yourself of how I'm going to define myself. So we're talking about the birth of mainstream broadband internet access, online multiplayer is becoming more mainstream. And the ability to just reach other people that are not physically next to you is becoming more mainstream. So you want to take your time to sit there and define who you're going to be identified as. And so for whatever reason, I came up with all these derivatives of Moo or Moogle. And I didn't know where it came from either at the time. So, and I'll go ahead and reference them because they're comic relief. Hana Moog Tana, that's hilarious. Shinsen Moogie, Moog Suko, Moog Hanabi, Mooglita, like there's all these variations. Darth Moogle, like come on. So in World of Warcraft, there's just massive city hubs before you go out and do raids or different quests and things like this. And somebody in the town of Dalaran, for any World of Warcraft viewers, asked me, man, you must really like Final Fantasy. And then in my brain, I realized that I had been brainwashed my entire life to either have a Moo or a Moogle derivative of something, and that's where it came from. Now today, it is absolutely on my business card. The majority of administrative leadership at OU do call me Moog, and family still calls me Moo. So that's the origin. It was one of those things that was forced upon me and then brainwashed into forever.
That's a great story, Mike. I think it's interesting that your whole life has been wrapped around video games.
Yes.
Right. And that's what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk specifically about parenting and what role do video games play in a childhood, and how do parents make sure that their children are not playing too much or. So let's get started. What role do you think that video games should play in a child's development?
So I want to take a moment right here and start defining video games in general. So a large portion of parents who are not gamers themselves will define games as a singular term, meaning that any game that you play is just a video game. And yes, but let me further dive into this. If you play a certain game like Roblox, popular in a very young age, then it can be social, which is a red flag potentially in meeting other people online, but it can also be done in an environment where it's not. So knowing those variables is almost like I got to learn about these games before I give them. The ratings of the games help a little bit, but they're not always the full picture. The other side of it is it might be something that is a bit more aggressive. Maybe it's something like Call of Duty, built in the physics of the world that we live in, with gun violence, with bloodshed, celebrating and also glorifying, unfortunately, wartime and things like that. And then you have games like sports, again, like FIFA or now FC and college football and Madden. And it's important to understand the genre first and foremost. And once you understand the genre, then you can apply different structures, I feel, when it comes to a parental kind of advisement of what would you use around it, or how would you govern it? How much time is good time? How much time is bad time? What ancillary things do I need to worry about that my child may interact with? And I think video games is a great thing, because a lot of the times we're thinking about video games as a large portion that I see is the babysitter.
Right.
You've done your time. I need mom or dad time. I need my way time. Be quiet and go do your thing. Leave me alone. I just need to breathe without noise. Well, it's not that kind of noise. And that's not entirely wrong. That's no different than uncles, grandpas, dads going out for fishing time, golf time, or anything else. That's the same thing. It's the same concept from that aspect. But the other portion is that we're not typically looking at video games as developmental tools. We oftentimes look at it at an early age of a cause and effect kind of mentality. Oh, you had good grades, you get some game time. Or you finished your homework, you got some game time. Nothing wrong with that strategy either. But all these things are different ways. It's no different than, hey, can I go outside and ride my bike with, Joe from down the street? Or can I go and play ball with the guys? Or can I go and, being 43 is now, all my students are all 18 to 23. So there's a massive generational shift for us too. So for me, it was riding bikes and hopscotch still before digital age came upon us as a millennial. So whatever it is, gaming can be applied as a babysitter. Sure, there's some okay with that. You just need leisure time, let them explore. It can be applied as the carrot on the stick mentality of forcing an incentivized cause and react in behavior. But it also serves another purpose, which is the one that parents are lacking on because we as a society haven't really defined it as this. It is a developmental tool. So in a developmental mindset, we're used to gamified titles, things like Mavis Beacon teaches typing back in the day, or mathematical apps or things like this that can really kind of be brain teasers and puzzles. And those things are kind of the third area that needs a little bit more definition. And the reason I say they need a little bit more definition is now we're in a world where we're used to being in T-ball at age 6 and then going down baseball or softball, depending on, your gender. And then potentially, if you're good at it, high school, varsity,
right,
scouting into universities, regardless of its divisional classification, and now pathways into pro. That world now exists in gaming too. And the whole point, I feel, when we talk about parents, mentors, guardians, teachers, is about challenging the next generation into figuring out what they're good at. And we don't use gaming as an opportunity to identify another talent side. The last thing that I mentioned about gaming is that gaming is just an interactive book. It can be an interactive book depending on the game. If we play games like Zelda from Nintendo, there's a story behind it. There's artwork, there's music design, there's character design, there's physics, there's challenges, there's brain teasers. If we play something like, NBA 2K, not so much. It's kind of course, I get the ball in the hoop and a dunk on them, and there's that. Or if I'm playing something like something that is more aggressive, like a first-person shooter or something where I have to attack the enemy and kill them, then that's a little bit less cerebral than story-based games. But story-based games can also inspire fine arts tracks, because a lot of people think about, I want to be a game designer. Well, a game designer, in our definition of our brain, often goes down the pathway of computer science, meaning coding. However, there is not a single, I wouldn't say that, but there's not a large percentage of computer science majors that are designing stages. They're not designing that human condition. They're not telling that story. That's a fine arts major. So that's classical composition. Those are those types of things where we can inspire or find other pathways that help a student find confidence in themselves to become whatever they're going to be in life.
Wow. You just said a whole lot in that answer. A couple of things I want to clarify. I think I heard you say that now there is a pathway through what we're calling esports to a pro level of playing, just like there is in football, soccer, and NBA. That's fascinating to me. I want to ask you a practical question.
Sure.
I'm a boomer, all right? I have grandbabies. When my kids come over, they love to use my iPads. And you mentioned Roblox. That's one of the favorite. Is it wrong for me to allow them to sit on and play on the iPads? My thinking, if you will, I'm helping prepare them for the future by helping them get technically advanced and adjusted. However, they do that by playing all these games. Am I doing something wrong?
I don't feel that the answer is as black and white as wrong. I think by default, if I was going to force a black and white answer, the answer is no, you're not doing anything wrong. But the ancillary or additional context that I would provide is time management and context management. So we know that in any scenario, oftentimes context isn't provided, whether it's an awkward conversation or a missed opportunity to provide context based on some experiential opportunity that youth or a person may experience. So if you're not there, and part of it is, again, let them do what they're doing so you can continue to make sure the house is upkept or feed them or whatever. But in those moments where questions arise, or in those moments where you see some hesitation of something they may not have experienced, or something they may have experienced, then you need to find ways to be able to articulate what they're experiencing. That's no different than the first time you burn your hand and say, this is why we don't touch fire, or this is why we don't skid on bare knees. This is why knee pads are important, and that helmet. But we don't do that in gaming because, again, we're not investing ourselves. We don't have the time to. There's a generational gap. There's a responsibility gap, sure. And there's no easy way to fix that aside from making an intention of trying to learn something about those games.
Right.
Roblox is a double-edged sword. So if we talk about certain games we've had for decades now, parental rating structures around, is it teen, is it 13, is it, for everybody, like a Mario Kart is for everybody. I would argue it's actually a mature title because of how aggressive Mario Kart gets. But those kind of ease a third of maybe the weight. The second, the intermediary part is it online or is it offline?
Right.
And then the third part being is if it's online, what kind of community does that game harbor?
Right.
Because if I go into a game like Call of Duty, again, more adult title, more adult-ish or late teenager, acceptable title loosely, then you're going to deal with some very aggressive communications.
Right.
But if you're in Roblox, again, we have to deal with potentiality of, sure, the majority of people playing Roblox are going to be of similar age distinction and similar societal standards in that regard. However, you're going to have creeps. That's just a natural thing. But that can be said for anything now in online anything, whether it's social media, whether it's some kind of forum, whether it's a video game, or even in a classroom setting if it's online. Mm-hmm. And we think and we felt for so long in 2000s from a societal standpoint that the gaming element, the multiplayer thing, the removing of our likeness in the game provided the anomalous nature of us being protected to be a bit sketchy. Mm-hmm. We have people that are absolutely predatory. You have people that are absolutely aggressive. And those things are being cracked down. They're not anywhere near perfect, but there's at least now intention of trying to fix those things and protect those things from the developers, from the network communications tool. Where in the earlier days, it was like, look at this cool game. It has great reviews. End of strategy. And that's what bred like all of that kind of questionable behavior in multiplayer online.
Right. Good answer. Thank you, sir. So how do parents and grandparents then distinguish between what's healthy gaming and what is maybe becoming problematic gaming behavior?
So addiction runs rampant in anything, right?
Right.
It's, whether it's, sugar in a soda, a Red Bull, or the dopamine fix of, whatever you achieve. And gaming is by design meant to be a bit addictive. And a big reason for that, especially in the younger generation, starting with the really millennial generation and younger, was I will attribute this to Microsoft specifically, where the Xbox comes out and they introduce this achievement system. So in this achievement system, you accomplish something in the game, whether it's a specific goal that's maybe separate from the mission, but it's meant to be something that is uniquely a badge you can wear digitally. And then this little sound comes up and achievement unlocks. And all of a sudden you're like, I'm sitting on top of a mountain. I am him, that kind of energy. And so that, further breeds the idea that I want more of that. And that's also attributing to the downfall of our attention spans, like those types of things. So those might be defined as negatives. I prefer to preface them more as explanations of how we got here. So in that scenario, when we talk about the difference between problematic gaming and what's wholesome gaming, as we could define it, the biggest identifier is timing. So if your grandkids are in your presence and they're spending more than 50% of their time, or I would say honestly 40% of their time or more, playing video games, why are they at your house in the first place? They could do that at home. Yeah. So its biggest challenge is that, yes, it's like pulling teeth, right? Like these kids are like, this is where my whole life is. My whole is defined as this. And the reason why their whole life is defined by that is because they found something that they're good at already. Yeah, Isn't that what we strive for no matter how age we are? We want something to be good at, a mastery of something. And this gives them their first opportunities to do that. And so that's the dopamine fix is amplified because now they feel pride in themselves. So that's where it's important to introduce those things and use gaming as other opportunities. What I would argue is that using gaming, you have an entire catalog of tools. So the iPad, because you have it already, becomes an easy option for them. But imagine if you introduce VR, which has a physical aspect to it, if they have the ability of being physical. Because at that point, yes, you can still have gaming. You can still get that dopamine fix of achievement unlocked. But now we can sweat a little bit. So now I can worry about wellness in another way. Or some of my favorite things in gamification focuses on, there's a game called Maestro where you get to be a conductor of a symphony in VR. which is a completely different experience.
That's really cool.
There are plenty of games that focus on the history telling. Imagine, maybe not for that age group, but imagine being in the Battle of Gettysburg. How much more real and how much more significant that history, instead of that paragraph in a book.
Right.
Now we can make it and speak it in their terms, which is a better way of teaching it anyway. Mm-hmm. Because sure, nobody, especially currently in society in this time that we're in right now, we don't want to think about war. But the other reason why we don't want to think about war is because we understood that war is a bad thing. But unless you teach that at a very core level, war is just a word. We have to provide context. We have to provide immersion. We have to provide an opportunity that says, these are ugly things. They happen in this world. And I want to hold your hand through exploring and understanding what this is. So back to the primary question is, how do I distinguish between healthy gaming and bad? I would define healthy gaming as something that is balanced throughout the day. Meaning that you got to eat on a regular basis. You got to sleep at a regular basis. Sure, if it's summer intersession, you can be a little bit more open with, you can stay up an extra hour and play video games. It's the summertime. Or if it's the weekend, even as an adult, for instance, in adults, I don't want to see my young students and young adults playing video games 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's an addiction problem. But if it's a holiday, and you got nothing else to do, spend 18 hours a day. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
If you could spend the entire day out camping and fishing all day, is that any different? So time management is probably the first way to identify healthy versus problematic. The second is, again, the game type. If they're screaming at their device because they died, I attribute that specific scenario as probably the biggest opportunity of a missed developmental, parental mentoring moment. When we have a 6-year-old in a t-ball field and they miss the ball or they lose the game and they throw a tantrum, what do we typically see? A coach comes in, teaches them about grace, teaches them about sportsmanlike conduct, tells them to go shake the hand of their adversary, and that we'll practice harder to not have that scenario again.
Right.
How is that any different than dying in a video game?
Oh.
So that mentorship and that structure from a parental standpoint or a mentorship standpoint is what's missing. We're not doing that with gaming. Instead, we're saying, knock it off, turn it off, go outside. That's not what we're doing on a t-ball field. We're not doing that. So apply that same t-ball mentality to that. What happened in the game? Explain why it happened so we can assess the problem. And what can we do to make that not happen any further?
Yeah.
So that starts to lay the foundation of what now moves the gaming side into the esports side. And I do want to define those two words because these two words are being thrown around a lot.
Right.
But they are very different and they do have crossover. So gaming is like playing a pickup game of basketball with your friends at a local court. You don't have to ask anybody to do it. You can just go do it. Esports is the NBA Finals, meaning all of that development, all of the team building, all of that marketing money, all of the salaries and performance expectations and everything else. A very different way of approaching the same thing of basketball. But yet both sides of the fence can still appreciate basketball.
Yeah.
So if you put that same kind of mentality around a game like Mario Kart, then you can imagine in Mario Kart on the esports side, the competitive side, they know the map's ins and outs. They know how to hit boosts at certain times. They know when certain hidden track components are. They know the game like a science. Whereas the gamer is just playing it as an opportunity to just enjoy themselves, and it's disconnect. There's a big fundamental difference mentally. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about now as that's the foundational layer of esports, well, when we do that in t-ball, that's the foundational layer of one, being a good person, but two, dealing with stress. And also if they have it in them, and they work at it and they're also gifted in that way, potential pathway of a career.
Right.
As early as 6 years old. If they're that good in baseball or softball and athletics, then that may result in something. So those are where you're now starting to see things like esports summer camps. And these things correlate heavily a lot with STEM tracks. So you'll see robotics programs, coding camps, and esports now to start being lapped in. Like iCode Norman is a great example here. Yeah. That now we partnered with them to do esports camps as another thing for that demographic to be involved in. But I reference that mainly because parents also don't know how to identify those moments in time where that is that developmental opportunity within gaming. Because all we think is, here's this device, and they're not screaming at me, and that's good enough, versus, hey, read this book and tell me what you learned in the book. Hey, play this game and tell me what challenges you faced. Or, hey, you died a couple times, so I heard you get frustrated. What happened? Like, that starts to build a foundational layer of also communication.
Right. Which
also is a psychological, opportunity of the next generation understanding how to articulate what's actually wrong, regardless of gender. regardless of it. And if you can articulate those things and you can identify those things, then you become stronger way earlier in life because you're susceptible to actually taking feedback.
Yeah.
And that's just like in athletes. Athletes are used to taking criticisms from their coach. You get it from the parent, you may not get it the same way, but it's usually respected from the coach because they understand that coach is in that position or in that mindset and time to develop them to become better versions of themselves.
That's really fascinating. It sounds like what you're saying is that in real life sports, coaches and parents often step in to help the competitor manage their emotions. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of missing or was missing in gaming until recent developments.
Right. And I would say, it's missing in the context of it's still not a mainstream. I'm not hearing parents do this regularly.
Yeah.
But now we're in the era where you do have, in the state of Oklahoma specifically, we now have over 300 high schools with esports programs. We now have over 150 middle schools with esports programs, and grades 4 and up in elementary now have esports programs. That's crazy opportunities. That's no different than now you have a choir path, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, band, any of these extracurricular traditional sports. This becomes another opportunity. Mm-hmm. And the bigger benefit too is that aside from that, oh yeah, of course my kids could be involved in those things. This also now includes those that have physical ailments because there's a lot of adaptive technology for those that may not have the ability of using their limbs or walking. And even those that may have actual like neck injuries or things like this for whatever reason. So gaming creates an opportunity of the proper world of inclusion that we would wish we would have, where there's no entry barriers to be involved aside from a little bit of money to buy it, but it doesn't matter who sits next to you in Mario Kart. The end of the game is Mario Kart is agnostic to political affiliation, areas of study. The only barrier is socioeconomic. And sure, that's still an important one, but that's only one, not 10. So that's where the importance of gaming should be prevalent in a household if there's interest organically, but it shouldn't be unbridled. It shouldn't be unregulated. It should be balanced.
Thank you. You said something that I want to step back to real quickly. I believe you said that OU is now offering summer camps in esports. Mm-hmm. Tell our parents where they could find out more information about that.
Yeah, so 2 different methods. Predominantly, our summer camps are geared for ages 13 and up, but when we do them, you can find them at ou.edu/esports. They're usually when we're promoting summer camps or right on the front page. Mm-hmm. But the other one that I reference is a program like iCode Norman. So we partner with iCode Norman specifically because they're predominantly in the age group up to 13. So they're like dealing with 7, 8-year-old to 13. And what these camps look like is that for a lot of parents that might hear that, they're like, oh, I don't want to sure, I can send my kids over to a camp to play video games. Great, whoop-de-doo. What they're learning in that camp is that for the first day, they're not touching the video game at all. What they're learning is stretching. They're learning blood circulation. They're learning how to develop goals. Because when we talk about playing a video game versus being an esports competitor, not the same thing.
Okay.
If we want to be good at softball, you got to swing that bat to start training your muscles. If you want to be good at stealing second, you got to run wind sprints to start building that in. And if you want to be able to run track, you run endurance. So those same things and those mechanisms, we have our own, training regimes that we need to do. Nothing get crazy. We don't want kids to just get sweaty for no reason. But there are certain muscle memory exercises in the real world away from the game that make you better in the game. So one example that we reference is a hand-eye coordination technique that we build where we use a rubber bouncy ball and you stand on concrete with a concrete wall behind you or your coach behind you. And we just throw that ball slowly over your shoulder and you have to catch it. You have no hand-eye coordination. You have no eye reception of where the ball's coming from. You have to react to it. So the translation between eye to hand is no different than what you see on the screen and make it out. And so there's techniques and things that we're teaching in regards to be good at the specific games that we're playing. But we start the entire camp with understanding how to take care of body as best as possible because I attribute, esports competition at the highest tier as being very mentally taxing. But I also reference chess of being mentally taxing. And chess, for those that are here, is now canonically an esport, as 90% of the games on the world are played on chess.com. Mm-hmm. But you typically don't see unhealthy chess players. And the reason why is not because they're hitting the gym and doing CrossFit or everything else. It's because the amount of caloric burn in the mental focus is still attributing to their health. You still need to stretch. You still need to do some, at least, maybe yoga or stretching or cold exercises. But you still need your body in tune. And that's also a big, not false conception about gamers because, again, most gamers aren't doing that. But the highest form of competitors are. So if they really genuinely say, hey, I think you might be talented in this, or that you have a passion about it, well, then let's go down the rabbit hole of showing you what that really means. Because just being good at the video game isn't a byproduct of just having a natural gift in the game. It still requires all the supplemental mechanisms that we have in traditional sports too.
Right.
Dietary, expanding your mind, resting properly, eating properly, lower sugar count, energy drinks are the devil, those types of things. And so those that's where we look at. So iCodeNorm is another example. If you're outside of those regions, the iCode system overall is deploying esports camps. And then more than likely, depending on the school systems you're in. I know in our region, Moore Public Schools is now all in. Norman Public Schools is all in. Oklahoma City Public Schools is all in. Edmond Public Schools is all in. Yukon and Mustang are now all in as of the last 2 years. And then almost the entire Tulsa region too. So all the major metropolitan public school systems and most of the rural ISD systems now have esports programs because, again, for the school systems, you're reaching an audience that aren't involved in football, where the majority of your money is going. A large portion of your extracurricular budgets. And what are you typically cutting first? Arts. Yeah. Right. So choir goes out the door. Band has less demand, but it has a little bit more because of the potential adjacency to football. But what takes, the cost of building an esports space inside of a school is taking a closet and putting 6 computers in it. It's a computer lab that might be a little bit more expensive, but it's a glorified computer lab. So it has a much lower overhead with a very high reach potential to reach a demographic that predominantly isn't involved in any of those things, even if they were funded.
So if I understood what you said correctly, then to excel in esports, you have to have some physicality about you. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's something that most parents don't realize.
Even the youth that are in wheelchairs, even those that have the inability to walk, as freely or have physical ailments, there's still exercises for them. They're less evasive, but they're still things because they're still using some apparatus to input. One of my favorite pieces of technology, my mom was a speech pathologist in Lawton Public Schools for 20 years. And so a large portion of her students were either born with some physical adversity or it was caused due to some kind of domestic instance.
Right.
But one of my favorite technologies came out. Sony and Microsoft both have one, but it was called the adaptive controller. And the adaptive controller looks like this old school Nintendo flat rectangular box, but it has all the normal buttons you'd see. So there's a D-pad, up, down, left, right, A, B, and a couple other buttons and triggers. But they map it with a headphone jack on on the top of the keyboard, which then can plug in any kind of switch. Meaning that, let's say I have atrophy in my right arm and I can't really use this. Well, I can strap a button across your chest and map it to that button, and now you can.
Wow.
So there's a lot of things that gaming can do when you take the time to go another 20% down the rabbit hole to see how to use it as a developmental tool in the household.
That's totally fascinating. Now let's switch topics just slightly. Privacy is, of course, a huge concern in any kind of online activity. So about what age do you think that parents should start talking to their children about online safety and online privacy?
So just like I referenced about the structure of K-12's pipeline in Oklahoma, there's a reason why we stop at age 4 for this very reason. So I personally don't feel that we need kindergarten through 3 esports programs in schools. However, one of the biggest weaknesses, especially as me as a millennial, very early elder millennial in that regard, is that we grew up mature. We grew up analog and we matured digital, and then we were thrust into a world where digital was now the expectation.
Right.
But nobody prepared us for that.
That's the truth.
Yes, the older generations was already ill-equipped, but we were in this awkward position where we had to be a steward of both worlds. It was on us. It was in our breathing life cycle. And what I look at is that K3 is a perfect opportunity to start talking about digital citizenship. So when we think about digital citizenship, we think about how you're behaving online. And we can attribute this because we all have a family friend, it might be ourselves, who goes online and trolls people, like literally tries to promote and literally watch the world burn. Some people are wired that way. It's unfortunate. But the goal is that that's just an extension of the neighborhoods we live in now. That's the real world. It doesn't matter if you're in Kenya, or if you're in Luxembourg, or if you're in Dallas, Texas. The world gets right next door now because of that. And that, for a lot of people, have doubled down on just being obnoxious because of a cultural difference and societal difference, and instead should have doubled down on understanding that Kenya is different from Luxembourg and Luxembourg different from Dallas. What are those differences? I'd love to learn about your culture so that I can also live vicariously through the way that your world looks like. And the spirit of travel that it used to be before we had so much content creation and things showing, the Maldives and showing Mount Fiji, these types of things. So Digital literacy can be attributed to really talking about walking through scenarios with a young mind of how they should behave. It's no different than before the technological age of saying, if somebody in a van comes up, opens the door, and says they got candy, you probably shouldn't jump into it. It's the exact same thing. So it's about helping them identify triggers that might be susceptible to being abused in preparation of a time where you're going to, no matter what you do, they're going to find a way to get online because of peer pressure.
That's true.
So the goal isn't about saying you can't do it, because if you can't do it, you're only going to incentivize the other. We always forget that we were them too, like at some point. When you tell me no, you're only fueling the fire for me to find my own yes. So instead, arm them from the world where you don't have to tell them no, because you don't have to worry about them as much. And in that can come in the form of, hey, you shouldn't be entertaining long conversations with anybody you don't physically know in the real world, as an example. So if you and your classmates are playing Roblox together, then as parents, hey, is your kid so-and-so this call sign? Is your kid so-and-so? Cool. I'm going to let them join friends, and then I don't have to worry about them in their networks. But if you start joining friends because they're just randoms and they had a good game with you, you need to advise them not to do that, at least not until maybe later in life. Mainly because you introduce that, you don't know what you're introducing. And you might be introducing snake water. You might be introducing the most beautiful bird, rainbow of energy, but you just don't know. So always side on the air of caution. But digital literacy is one of those things that transcends gaming. Gaming just creates an opportunity to start teaching digital literacy. Digital literacy is a necessity for all of society, because if we had better understanding of how we interact and the power of words even better, and now in a digital sense, and that being a keyboard warrior, being able to hide your likeness behind your text isn't okay just because you can do it. There's a lot of things that we could do if we wanted to, but we societally know that that's good or bad, but yet we don't teach that exclusively yet. Right. And that needs to be taught at an early age. That's no different than saying yes sir, yes ma'am, or reacting to certain behavior, or cause and effect, or doing homework and you get a reward, having good grades, you get a reward. You work for things, you can achieve them, but it also means how you go through the journey is oftentimes more important than the end result. So that can literally take in the form of be mindful of who their friends lists are, be mindful of who this is, and build a trust mechanism that says, if somebody's on your friend list, I need to be able to ask you who that person is, and you need to be able to explain why they're in your friends list. And if you can't, you need to unfriend them. And if you're doubling down and I see that again, and you're not being able to explain it, block them. Like, we're at an early age. They're going to make friends. But you got to keep your own mental health, because yes, if you don't do that, if you don't get that aggressive with controlling their friends' networks, then you will introduce exactly the worst places and scenarios possible.
So it does require some aggression or some close monitoring on the behalf of the parents and the grandparents, perhaps.
Yes, and in 2025, it's a much better story than it was in 2001. 2002, and now, especially on Nintendo oftentimes a younger generation's first gaming console, as Nintendo's known with Mario and things like this, are classic games for knowing to be the family sofa, gameplay together.
All right.
And so they've introduced parental controls that allow you to not allow for friend requests, as an example. So you can basically still play online games, but you can cut out all the communications. So this is fine. So like, there's a game called Fall Guys. This is a great example. Fall Guys is a game where you're just this little blob, more marshmallow looking thing, and you have to go through this obstacle course to get to the finish line before everyone else. That's the premise of the game. But you have different apparatus and different things. There's like, bouncy things to be on. There's things that can kick you off of the map and then you restart. But the game, for the most part, isn't really social. But you have to have other people. You're not playing against computers. You're playing against 19 other people to get to that. And you can still friend people in it, you still communicate, but it's not designed to do that as an emphasis. It's meant to just say, here's the Hunger Games and let's go, in that regard. But, games like that are built that way on a purpose to reach the younger demographic and have some sensibility for the parents. But Nintendo already is starting to bake it, and now we have a brand new Nintendo console as of 3 weeks ago. They've baked it in where you can actually turn off the ability to communicate at all. Oh. And most consoles have that protection mechanism. Even on the iPad, there's so much parental control that we typically don't deploy. Like, you can basically launch an app and inhibit their ability of exiting the app. It's built into the iPad. It's been built in, I think, since 6 iOSs ago. And so it can really say that you can only be in this app. That way you can't go in the web browser. You can't go in these other things. So it's really also about, it's not so much learning about the game even half the time. It's also just learning about the technology.
Right.
And that's not easy because nothing comes with an instruction mail anymore. Like, you have to kind of do research because one, printing paper costs money and people throw that in the trash anyway. So that's where, open up YouTube and immediately searching parental controls in this game or
Good
protection
tip.
mechanism in this platform. iPad is extremely powerful. So I used to work for Apple at the birth of the iPad Air, the original, and the birth of iCloud. So the end of the Steve Jobs era into the Tim Cook era. And one of the things that we really liked about the iPad and the reason why it was still dominating over any Android competitors at the time was because of parental controls. So you could literally lock iPad down like Fort Knox, and you even more so today, to really focus and give tunnel vision to some singular function despite the dynamic nature of what the iPad represents.
Okay.
So it could be like, hey, you're going to only be able to play this game. We're going to put in this little code that we're not going to teach you, and you can't exit it. So unless you want to play Roblox, that's all you're going to do with this device. Another way to reduce the anxiety of what those kids might be interacting with. And then you go into who's on your friends list and why.
So great parenting tip. Go to YouTube and search, and it'll tell you how to
put in platform or title and say communications tools or parental controls.
So when my kids were young, the Wii was a big thing.
Yeah.
And, that was fun, family, tennis, golf.
Yeah.
With the games today, how do parents create a bonding opportunity or bonding moment with their children over games?
One of the there's multiple answers to this, and this is probably one of my favorite questions in today's lineup. And the reason why is that we forget the power of presence.
Yeah.
The power of presence. Didn't say interact. Presence. When a kid is playing as a young athlete, I played soccer growing up in West Germany myself, and all my family was a soccer family. So when parents came to watch, family came to watch, you played better. You felt better.
Yeah.
You felt pride because somebody that you know with, that you intimately know, is here to watch you. So power of a presence is the easiest one. It could be reading a book on the sofa behind them. It could be, playing on their own iPad or console for younger parents. Power of presence alone. And one, it'll help you learn the game without you having to sit there and play the game yourself, because then you can ask questions while things are uncovering. Hey, why does that character look that way? I don't know. Cool. Well, let's figure that out. And at that point, you're now sharing something organically instead of forcing it. Like, I want to play games with you. That doesn't always work. At some point, they hit that age where they're like, I don't want anything to do with you. But if you start at an earlier age, then at least at the same point, they're not going to feel like they need to do that in the corner. Because the minute that you make something taboo in your household, oftentimes doesn't stop them from doing it. I can reference my own childhood. It doesn't stop us from doing it. It just meant that we're going to go do it, but we're not going to include you anymore.
Right.
You've now been alienated from the very thing that we're defining ourselves at this milestone in development.
Right.
So be a power of presence is the first one. Literally just being in the same room and just hanging out. Whether it is, hey, we don't really have it set up where I can play games or be in the same room as them, make it that way. It's a TV and a console or a PC. Move something, get a laptop if you can afford it, or move it in a more centralized place where, one, you can keep eyes on them, but it's not about babysitting them in that way. It's more about interacting with them, who is literally playing a story in front of you, and you both can go down that story together.
Yeah.
My dad, and this is hilarious because a millennial, in 1997, 96, when Final Fantasy VII came out, as an amazing story game, sat on the couch and watched the first half of me playing that. And he still remembers it today. And that's a lifetime ago for me and for him, but he even references it now. And so those are those moments of just being present.
That's amazing.
The second one is obviously play the games with them. And it's a matter of selecting certain games. This is a really cool time in gaming again, in that we had several games that came out in the last 2 years that are collaborative, that are intentionally meant where you cannot complete the game without another person. So these can be wonderful things that one can test your limits and patience, but it's another thing to help them work through challenges, because especially, maybe you're not a gamer and you don't necessarily have the muscle memory and agility as somebody who is literally a third of your age or half your age. And so allow them to be the mentor. Let them understand the ability for them to be the teacher themselves, the coach, and be like, hey, I understand you're frustrating, but help me work through this so that we can accomplish this together. Because how many environments do we have where we have to rely on other people? If you're not in traditional sports, which is a core lesson they learn, we oftentimes have it in doing this podcast. There's 4 souls in this room. So to make this happen. So using every angle. always taking at least 5 to 10 steps back from what your knee-jerk reaction and front-facing response to these things often results answers of how you can integrate gaming into the life on a daily basis or in a scheduled cycle where you're included in there and you're including them both ways. It may also inspire you to say, you know what, maybe you're a giant game Hogwarts fan. There's a game, with Harry Potter called literally Hogwarts Legacy. That was a continuation of story. So you get to be your own wizard. For a millennial, never mind the kid, give me the controller. I want to go throw magic. Or maybe you want to reenact Lord of the Rings, the massive Orcai fight, on the wall. Or immerse yourself in the environment of Star Wars and its multitude of different pathways. It doesn't necessarily have to be this. It can be one of those things where you can also teach them patience by also being present and watching. Because it's maybe like, hey, this game isn't for you, but I'd like you to be on this journey and at the same point, watch. Or I'd like to say, hey, let's take turns playing different chapters.
Oh.
So if we're thinking about gaming in a one-dimensional way, then we're already thinking about, well, that's a one-player game. So a one-player game still can have a spectator. That's why we have influencer media today. That's what they're doing.
Exactly.
It's the exact same concept, except now it's no longer media. It's now just a memory that we're building in person. And that's literally the reason why influencer media is so popular. It is that same exact sensibility of presence that is then removed because of the distance and the ability to connect dots and make people be in your living room if you invite them in. So those types of things are other ways to think about it. So yes, you can have NBA 2K and we're going to play against each other. At some point, dad is going to more than likely, wreck uncle, brother is going to wreck the younger one until they get known in the game. And then the younger one is going to wreck them and they're not going to like it. So sure, you have those games. That's fine. Teaching respectable competition is also a good thing. But a one-player game doesn't mean that both players can't play. It just means that, hey, take your time, get through this, and then I'm going to come in and play another chapter. And I want you there. I don't want to play the game without you because the point is that you can continue on each other. So, but there are games that now literally have mechanisms where you cannot advance without two players. You have to get through a story where you're competing your mission, and they're competing their mission. And sometimes in tandem. You have to do it timing, like a Mission Impossible kind of scenario. So then those are really great for building bonds.
Mike, we're getting close to the end of our time together. And one of the things that I neglected to do earlier was ask you about your personal life. Do you have children?
I don't. I have probably 12 nieces and nephews. And now I would say that I have over 3,000 students that I wouldn't say that I watch over them as a fatherly figure, but I definitely more like a decently engaged uncle figure. And a lot of those times in those conversations, I look at the fact that I don't have kids, not as a decision to not have kids. My wife had some physical ailment, and to me, my wife is more important than that scenario. But that energy that was then redirected focused on helping develop young students and develop pathways and find purpose. Because I'm 43 now, living a dream of a world where I get to build an esports program at a Division I SEC school.
That's pretty cool.
And my job responsibilities, if I was to define them, are very similar to the athletics director of OU.
Yeah.
Just scale. It's just a difference of scale. Building official teams, developing fan engagement, youth development pipelines and programs, facilities, all those things are there. It's just rewind OU football 50 years.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at. And my goal is to say, how can I make what my accomplishments have been earlier in the timeline of my students? Yes, I'm at the start of a new industry and a new sector at 35, 36 when I started this, now at 43. But for them, they should easily be able to get into this at 25, 27, and 30 and be very impactful.
Right.
Because that resets a lot of the things. Because who is the head coach of a Rocket League team? Got to build them. We can tell you Brent Venables' journey, right? The head coach of OU football, athletics coordinator, defensive line coordinator, those types of things. You see that journey that led to him to become a head coach, right?
Right.
That history just repeats here. The irony and the hilarity of it is that my coaches on their resume, Division I Power 4 conference head coach. Brent Venables, Division I Power 4 conference head coach.
Same title.
So there's other pathways when we think about being like the topic that we represent today. Gaming creates an opportunity where people can just escape. Sometimes you need an escape. They can be social. There are good and bad habits with that. One of my favorite memories in gaming is at the end of my World of Warcraft era, we dedicated. There's a command in the game where you can type that shows all the game that you've played straight, like how much time. And I'll reveal that number. It was 3 years and 4 months, and I forget the hours and times, but 3 years, 4 months. That's if you never logged off. That's how much time of my life that was used in this. In that, I met people from different time zones. I met people from different countries, and I even married a couple in game who are still married today. That was 2005 to now. Still married today. Now have 2 kids. And the beauty of it is I became everyone's psychologist and peer. It was a community in the same sense of a community in the traditional sense. Like growing up in the military, you had your peers that were there with you in the service. And if the communities were hospitable, you started to build with the common, those that were native to those areas.
Yeah.
And gaming can do that same thing. It can make us feel welcome in environments where we've never really felt welcome before, or have never felt the sense of community or family. And my job is to really focus on how gaming can be in a conduit. Whether they go into an industry of gaming or esports, the point is gaming significant for them? So if it's significant for them now, then I can use it as a means to supercharge their academic career to then establish a good member of society that contributes to wherever they plant their roots. Yeah. That's the end game. Right. If they go into esports and gaming, cool. If they don't, I don't care. The purpose of higher education is to develop workforce and well-rounded individuals to be contributors to the world that we want to build.
Right.
Period. Anything past that North Star, I don't care about. I just don't. That's the governing thing for me. And so that was significant. So while we were not able to have kids, that's the foundation from a mentality standpoint and vision standpoint for me as a director for now a 9-year running program that was started from scratch that has a community currently of over 3,900 members, which is more than 10% of OU's entire population.
Wow. And
over 180 students in development currently. Those are in the programs that we actually have. And I think the number that we ran was over 6,700 students have come through our programs in some tier since birth. Those are my kids.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you're mentoring so many people and putting them on a positive path. So then how do you know when some of these students are showing signs of maybe using gaming to cope with anxiety or other issues?
So when we talk about, this is definitely a multi-layered answer, and I'm trying to simplify it as best I can. Mm-hmm. Gaming energy, it's harder to identify those problems. Esports energy, easier because they're watched over. They have coaches, they have peers that are responsible to accomplish common tasks. They're a team, they're a unit. So I'm going to start on the esports side first. So those that find themselves playing with the same community over and over. So maybe they are playing Call of Duty in their upper tiers, teens, and we've approved it. Or even Fortnite. Fortnite's a great one, not bloody or anything like this. Extremely significant title in the industry still today. Mm-hmm. But maybe they have a common group. They have a you can do trios and quads inside of there and duos. So maybe they have a standard, 3 other people that they squad up with. And if one's not available, they do trios. That community is already probably 200% more likely to be able to self-identify when issues comes up because, hey, they haven't logged on for 3 days. Immediate wellness check. Hey, you're off today. You good? Immediate wellness check. Hey, we only played 30 minutes. Did something come up? What's going on? Immediate wellness check. So that side of the fence, that's why most people are like, you need to get off the game and get social. Most people in the real world don't have that kind of bond where they have somebody that's going to easily identify that you're off today. Are you okay? That simple question opens the floodgates of correcting potential mental health sinks, dark places, and so forth.
Wow.
On the gaming side, it's harder because you have a lot of people that are all over the place. Someone that plays a game like Fortnite, someone that plays a game like Call of Duty, very different demographics, similar style game. You have someone that's playing what's called a cozy game, which are meant to be really lighthearted games that can be approached a larger young girl and women demographic on that side. And a part of the reason that they're on that side of the tracks is because gaming understood that for young girls, as an example, young women, and women in general, in video games that are multiplayer, a large portion of women struggle with, in the first 10 seconds of any lobby, whether or not to even open their mouth. Because as soon as they find out that they're a woman or a girl, boys become dogs, men become dogs. And that's part of the sophistication of developing in digital citizenship that I represent at an early age. And what I represent in the space is we develop pipeline, the same way that we have the majority, 95%, 99% of athletes that come into D1 schools are pretty well-rounded and well-centered. There's still some oddballs, but the larger percentage of them are good sportsmen and understand how to behave. We don't have that in esports. That's what my longer term cultural impact will be. So the gaming side is, it's hard for those that just what we call lurk, literally stay in the shadows of digital communities. There's nothing that we can really do for them aside from telling them that we exist and that we care. Saying that, hey, we're going to do events. We're going to run this survey. We're going to see what the community wants to, put an event around and start building an event around that to try and entice them to come out of their shell. One of the biggest challenges, and the bigger the university this becomes, the bigger the challenge, just in percentage and scale, is getting students to come out of wherever they're living. Especially in a very polarizing world that we live in.
Right.
And as a byproduct of COVID, where we all became hermits, regardless of generation.
Right.
So how do we reverse engineer that? And the only way to do that is to try every chance you can to meet them where they're at as a starting point to drag them one way or the other. You can't start with wanting them to come and drag unless it's just that dire of a service. And gaming will never be that, and it should never be that. But it can be as simple as saying, hey, what do we want to play today? Or remember, you can think about soliciting 3,900 people. You're going to get a very diverse answer pool. So maybe it's like, hey, we're gonna run the survey. Maybe it's the top 5 games that have at least X amount of votes. We're going to plan some programming this semester around, and we reach a larger chunk. There's no way to reach all of them, but there's a larger chunk, and in that chunk, they start to come out of their shell a little bit more. Oh. And when they come out of their shell, they start to communicate in digital forms, and then they start to have a personality, which then that personality becomes a staple of that community. And when the personality is gone, the community reacts with checking on where they at. I haven't heard from Sandy today. I haven't heard from Tina. I haven't heard from Joseph. I haven't heard from, Ahmad. I haven't heard from these people. What's going on? It's like, good. You're right. We haven't seen them in 2 or 3 days. Maybe it's the 4th day. And then for me as an instructor and as a faculty member and staff member of the university, I'm going to shoot them an email.
Right.
And then if they don't respond to the email, I'm going to say, hey, I need a wellness check from, student misconduct, whatever resource I have in OU, just to go knock on a door or check them in depending on where they're at. And that's what life should look like. Get a little emotional here. One of the fundamentals my dad taught me is we have an uncle who's no longer with us, but my grandfather had passed. My grandfather's a World War II vet, sheet metal worker, tail gunner on a B-17.
Wow. And
I had the luxury and extreme humbling privilege of pinning a Purple Heart from World War II on his chest because of the chaos of the theater at the time, had lost all those records. And in that same day, in that same weekend, my father, who's a very opinionated person, the youngest sibling, the youngest child of our grandfather, my youngest uncle, couldn't afford to come. And my dad, who doesn't like this uncle, I won't say didn't appreciate him. He was definitely the free child, the baby of 6 in that family, 5 in that family. He says, come on, we're going back to the hotel. I need you to help me order plane tickets for your uncle. I said, Dad, why are you doing this? It's like, because what am I working for if it's not to support my community? Period.
Beautiful.
Even
lesson.
If I don't like them or not, the point is my community would be better if that person's here. Right. So imagine trying to instill that in a digital environment where COVID has happened, where we've had digital bullying, doxing, terrorism, and trying to carve out a space in that digital sphere where you can have sanctuary. And for those that find it, it's one of the best things ever, because no matter what, yeah, maybe your kids are getting on your nerves. It happens. Maybe your significant other is getting on your nerves. That's why you go on your fishing trip. That's why you're going on your hunting. And for the next generation, they're not going to want to do those things, but they'll have this. So building a community around that understands respect, that understands the ability of the significance of just checking on each other and letting people know through the power of presence, even in the non-physical form, that somebody's got their back and that will be willing to look out for them just in a little bit of thing, saves lives. And it goes a long way. As a military service member and veteran myself, especially for those that I was both blessed and cursed. I look at it as both ways of not being deployed anywhere. So I'm not a combat vet, but I have plenty of peers that were. And to see them come back in shambles, and a large portion of them deter to gaming because it allows their brain to disconnect from those memories and the trauma and focus on something new. Now, they might double down, the Marine Corps veterans, they might double down and play something like Call of Duty, which would not be what I would recommend a veteran to play if they were a war combat veteran. But some are wired to be able to do that. So they double down. The adrenaline allows them to find sanctuary. And those points are the ones that I want to make sure that, hey, just checking on you. I know you look good, but just want to check on you because you're doubling down on a mechanism to go where you were versus to avoid it. And so those things just come. And the significance of a handshake still happens in the world that we live in today, where yes, the younger generation struggles with eye contact. Yes, they struggle with a handshake. Yes, they struggle with meeting you in the physical world. But they are just as productive, if not more productive, sitting on their butt on a computer, understanding how to manipulate that piece of technology to accomplish productivity, where the older generation, who their administration is, struggles to even open a PDF document.
Right.
And that's okay. Wisdom is important. Experiences are important. But the world is very different for them. And part of the reason at 43 that I really only have maybe one gray hair in my lip and not really anywhere else and a head full of hair is because I allow 18-year-olds who are less than half my age to teach me too. And I remember struggles with my own father, Vietnam era vet who served as well, and just articulating our differences of the way the world looked to us. And then not forgetting that conversation so that I didn't dismiss the 18-year-old who didn't even get to attend a prom because we were in isolation, which is a very different kind of rite of passage. How many movies had a prom scene in it?
Right.
In like 80s coming of age series, and for the entire generation just goes right over the head. What does that even look like? Didn't even get to walk a stage in high school. So those are their specific burdens, but it is our opportunity to be empathetic and say, I'm going to meet you where you're at and find a way to pull you a little bit out of your shell, not to rewrite who you are and change who you are, but to help you understand that there are other things out there and they require more than just a digital experience. But if I can only use the digital experience to start that influence, then that's the pathway I use. But to dismiss the digital opportunity to interact is basically saying, I don't want to talk to you, or I don't want to interact with you, or I don't care about you. That's what that statement translates to a younger generation who is completely in a world of ones and zeros. Even if they may not understand how the technology works in the context of what's under the hood, they understand how to make the technology do what they need to. And in the world of AI coming upon and being more prevalent,
right,
they will be leaps and bounds more productive than we will be in a large portion, except from the physical aspects. But that doesn't mean better. It just means different.
Yeah. Our guest today is Mike Aguilar, who is the director of esports and co-curriculum at the University of Oklahoma. Mike, let me just, as a personal privilege, say how wonderful and refreshing it is to have someone with your soul and your thoughtfulness in this very important position, I think, especially moving into the future. I think the University of Oklahoma scored big when they got you in. I have one last question for you. What is one piece of tech-related parenting advice that you wish you might have received when you were younger?
Not being a parent directly. My biggest thing is I think I would have quadrupled down on the balance aspect. So plenty of times we also use gaming as a mechanism. And if you think of about a world, this scenario should be much easier if you listen to this whole podcast. A scenario of a world where esports is now their extracurricular, right? Mm-hmm. Just like soccer or football. There's a dependency to that team. You have an obligation now to other individuals. The esports side of this, if it goes down that rabbit hole, has that same thing. But parents will oftentimes just say, get off the video game, not acknowledging their responsibilities. As an adult, when you mess up, the faster you have accountability to that mistake, right, the faster you potentially move past it and actually learn to avoid it. But to put the brakes exclusively and full force on something that is giving them life or giving them an outlet, I don't think is a great response. I think it's a more traumatic response in general. It's shell shock. If something is so bad, okay. But if we're talking about things like I didn't take the trash out or stuff like that, then that needs to be a deeper conversation, not a yelling match. That needs a deeper conversation about this. And instead of saying you can't play video games, now you have another mechanism if they go down the path of esports where you can pull that coach in. I had my dad call my soccer coach plenty of times. Hey, he hasn't done chores. Guess who got benched? And soccer was life. So I think it would be the quadrupling down of understanding balance.
Right.
Not the black and white of you can do this or you can't based on your behavior. There's grades to it. It has to be. Because we're not going to knock somebody at 16 years old who is literally getting scouted at a D1 university for basketball and say, you can't practice anymore. So in that same scenario, it's about saying, if you do this and you continue on this path, I'm going to have to do this. Or I need you to understand that gaming can be an important part of your life. I want to support that dream and who you are right now.
Right.
But these other things have to happen. Having that actual discussion about accountability. The hardest thing that I struggle with in young adults and pretty much anybody is just accountability. No one likes to be wrong. No one likes to be called out when they mess up. And yes, there are tactful ways of calling somebody out respectfully and professionally. But the best people in the world are those that can give you positive, specific feedback and negative, specific feedback. And that's what Apple taught me when we actually learned how to do feedback in those moments. So the key is not to say that sucks, end of statement. The key is to say that could be better because of A, B, and C. And to introduce the critical thinking of understanding causality and the ability of having multiple pathways is no different than which path you take in The Legend of Zelda in the video game. So gaming can provide pathways in critical thinking in the real world and vice versa. It's just a matter of a parent or mentor connecting those dots.
Right. You may not be a parent, Mike, but you have a lot of great parenting advice. And thank you for that very, very much.
Thanks for having me.
Our guest today has been Mr. Mike Moog Aguilar, who is Director of Esports and Co-Curriculum at the University of Oklahoma, and he's also an instructor at the Gaylord College of Journalism. Before we end, Mike, is there anything that you would like to say, any questions that we didn't ask, any topics that you would like to cover?
The only thing that I'll say is that now that you've heard all this, for the parents, you're both wrong and right. But for the kids that say gaming and I play all this time, you're both wrong and right. And the reason I say that is that, yes, parents, they need to go outside. They need to touch some grass. Within reason, but you can't exclude this topic. And for the kids, they're still the parent. And at the same point, you do need to touch grass. At the same point, it'll make you a better gamer. I promise you. You can't just spend on the game. The last thing that I'll say is a performance analytic that's significant to know about the future of this topic. In the United States, North American continent, Canada included, 67% of all 18 to 29-year-olds play a video game of some sort. Wow. Name another topic where 67% of that age demographic is doing the same thing, because it sure as heck ain't politics. It's not what they're studying. It's not their religion. It's not even what they're eating. So this topic is formidable. Don't shy away from it. Embrace it, but find some way to own that ability to embrace it. Don't just say we're going to let games in for the sake of letting games in. We're going to let games in with these strategies and this structure in place. That's the key. And then at that point, gaming becomes an asset to the household to set up that kid and their future versus being a detriment and their downfall because you let them do it too much and without being structured. And for kids, you can have exactly what you want, but you need structure.
Very well said. Thank you, Mr. Mike Aguilar. And thank you for tuning in to the Forge Your Trail podcast. And we hope that you'll come back and view us for our other guests. Thank you again, Mike.
Yeah, thank you.